The transmission came on a Tuesday. Of course it was a Tuesday. Important, universe-altering events always seem to happen on Tuesdays. As if Monday wasn't terrible enough already, the cosmic forces that we just had to pile existential dread onto humanity's collective plate right after the weekend. The message blared through every communication device on Earth simultaneously, bypassing all security protocols like they were made of wet tissue paper. Phones, radios, televisions, computers, smart fridges, those annoying AI assistants that never understand what you're asking for, all of them suddenly broadcasting the same message in perfect, slightly too formal English. Greetings, inhabitants of Sol 3. We are the Vesperian Confederation, and we have deemed your world worthy of our attention, so prepare to receive our emissaries. This is a great honor. You're welcome. Captain Jack Meyers was eating a peanut butter sandwich when the message played through his phone. He stared at it for a solid minute, peanut butter stuck to the roof of his mouth, before muttering, "Well, crap." 4 hours later, he found himself in the United Earth Defense Force headquarters beneath Geneva, surrounded by panicking officials and one extremely calm Commander Tessa Rodriguez. "So," she said, sliding into the chair beside him, "aliens, that's new." Jack raised an eyebrow at her. "That's your response to first contact? That's new? Would you prefer I run around screaming like General Hartman over there?" Tessa nodded toward a red-faced man who was indeed doing something very close to running and screaming, just with more military jargon thrown in. "Fair point." Jack sighed, rubbing his temples. "Any idea why they picked us for this meet and greet? We're just tactical officers." "Apparently," Tessa said, pulling up a holographic display, "we scored highest on the doesn't panic when everything goes sideways assessment." "We have that." We do now." Their conversation was cut short as the UEDF director, a stern woman named Eleanor Burke, stepped to the podium. "People, we have 12 hours before the Vesperian delegation arrives. Satellite imagery shows their ship has already entered our solar system. It's..." The display behind her showed what could only be described as a floating space cathedral combined with a Swiss Army knife. Gleaming spires jutted at odd angles from a central mass that seemed to shift and reconfigure even as they watched. Captain Meyers, Commander Rodriguez, Director Burke continued, "You've been selected as humanity's representatives for this encounter. Try not to get us all killed, please." Jack raised his hand. "Man, with all due respect, why us and not, actual diplomats?" "Because," Burke said with a grim smile, "if these aliens turn out to be hostile, I want people who can shoot straight and think faster. The diplomats will be feeding you lines through earpieces. Just try to look impressive and not too human." 11 hours and 58 minutes later, Jack and Tessa stood in the middle of a hastily cleared landing zone in Central Park, New York. They wore specially designed diplomatic uniforms that some designer had thrown together overnight, sleek, black, with just enough gold trim and shoulder padding to make them look vaguely important. "How do I look?" Jack asked, adjusting his collar. "Like an extra from a low-budget sci-fi film," Tessa replied, not looking up from her tablet. "But that might work in our favor. They might think we're more advanced than we are." The sky darkened as the Vesperian ship descended, parting clouds and causing nearby birds to flee in terror. It was significantly more impressive up close, with pulsing lights that seemed to follow no discernible pattern and a hull that reflected everything and nothing at once. A beam of shimmering light shot down, and 3 figures materialized before them. The aliens stood nearly 7 feet tall, with iridescent skin that shifted colors like oil on water. They had 4 arms each, ending in delicate, 6-fingered hands, and their faces were dominated by large, multifaceted eyes that reminded Jack of insect eyes, only more, but judgmental. The central figure stepped forward, its head crest extending in what humans would later learn was a sign of diplomatic authority. "Greetings, Sol 3 representatives," it said, its voice melodious yet somehow condescending. "I am Ambassador Krylox of the Vesperian Confederation. We have observed your species for some time and determined you are primitive but salvageable. This is quite the honor for beings at your stage of development." Jack felt Tessa stiffen beside him. He cleared his throat. "Welcome to Earth, Ambassador Krylox. I'm Captain Jack Meyers, And this is Commander Tessa Rodriguez. We represent the United Earth Defense Force. Defense Force, Krylox repeated, the words sounding almost amusing in their mouth. How quaint. Well, not to worry. Soon you'll have much better defenses. Ours. And just like that, humanity's first official alien encounter was off to a fantastic start. The Vesperian delegation didn't waste time with pleasantries. After being escorted to the United Nations headquarters, a building they referred to as charmingly simplistic, Ambassador Krylox addressed the hastily assembled world leaders with all the warmth of a tax order delivering bad news. The Vesperian Confederation spans 17 star systems and oversees the development of 32 sentient species. Krylox announced, gesturing grandly with their upper set of arms, while the lower set remained folded in what Jack assumed was the alien equivalent of keeping your hands in your pockets. Your planet has resources we find useful and a strategic position we find convenient. Therefore, we offer you the generous opportunity to become a protectorate species under our benevolent guidance. The room remained silent, partly from shock and partly because nobody was quite sure if the alien had finished speaking. And if we decline this generous offer? Asked the Secretary General, a tall woman from Kenya who looked like she was calculating how many security protocols had been breached just by allowing these aliens into the building. Krylox's skin rippled in shades of purple and blue, an expression Jack couldn't interpret but definitely didn't like. Then we would face the regrettable necessity of demonstrating our technological superiority in ways your primitive species might find uncomfortable. The alien's multifaceted eyes seemed to glitter with something between amusement and disdain. You have 48 Earth hours to formalize your acceptance. We believe that's more than generous, considering most species simply accept immediately. As Krylox and the other two aliens glided out of the chamber, Jack noticed something odd. Despite their intimidating appearance and advanced technology, the Vesperians moved with surprising caution, almost as if they were nervous. That couldn't be right. Did you see that? Tessa whispered, leaning close as chaos erupted in the chamber. See what? The way the one on the right flinched when that camera flashed, and how they all moved away from the coffee station like it was radioactive. Jack nodded slowly. They're acting like they're afraid of us, while simultaneously threatening us. That's interesting. Behind closed doors, the Emergency Security Council meeting was going exactly as well as one might expect when facing an alien ultimatum. We should just agree to their terms, the French representative insisted. Buy time to learn their weaknesses. Absolutely not, countered the representative from India. History has taught us that appeasement never works, regardless of which planet the aggressors come from. Arguments flew back and forth while Jack and Tessa stood in the corner, comparing notes on their observations of the Vesperians. They have incredibly advanced propulsion and communication tech, Tessa said, scrolling through data on her tablet. But did you notice their personal shields flicker whenever they're near our wireless signals? And they kept at least 10 feet away from all the food, Jack added. I thought it was just alien disgust, but maybe they're actually vulnerable to something we consider completely harmless, Tessa finished, her eyes lighting up. The director of the UEDF approached them, looking grim. Please tell me you two have something more useful than the diplomatic corps, suggestion to open a dialogue about shared cultural values. Jack exchanged a look with Tessa. Ma'am, we might have the beginnings of an idea, but we need to get aboard their ship. You want to infiltrate an alien vessel with technology centuries beyond ours? Director Burke stared at them, like they'd suggested swimming in lava for fun. Actually, Tessa said with a slight smile, I think their tech might not be as far beyond ours as they want us to believe. And more importantly, I think they might be more afraid of us than we realize. Burke was silent for a long moment. You have 6 hours for reconnaissance. After that, I need you back here to help formulate Earth's official response to their ultimatum. As they left the building, Jack glanced at Tessa. So how exactly are we planning to sneak onto an alien spaceship? Tessa pulled out what looked like an ordinary pen. With this, a pen. A pen that happens to emit the exact frequency of radiation that seems to interfere with their visual sensors. I noticed their eyes flickering whenever someone used their phone near them. Different part of the spectrum. Jack grinned. Commander Rodriguez, I think I'm developing a crush on your brain. Save it for after we save the world, Captain. Getting aboard the Vesperian mothership proved surprisingly easy. Disturbingly easy, in fact. I was expecting laser grids and alien guard dogs, Jack whispered as they crept through a pulsating corridor that seemed to breathe. Not two bored-looking sentries who ran away when you pointed your flashlight at them. It wasn't the flashlight, Tessa corrected. It was the frequency it emits. Something about it clearly causes them discomfort. They had sneaked aboard using a maintenance hatch that the aliens had left conspicuously unguarded. Tessa's modified flashlight, which she insisted on calling a spectrographic interference device, had sent the few Vesperians they encountered scurrying away like cockroaches when the kitchen light comes on. Their ship design makes no tactical sense, Jack noted as they navigated the twisting corridors. All these open spaces, minimal internal security, no choke points for defense. It's like they never expected anyone to board them, Tessa agreed, or they've never had to worry about being boarded. They reached what appeared to be a central data hub, a cavernous room filled with floating holographic displays and what Jack assumed were alien computer terminals. The room was completely unattended. Okay, this is just embarrassing now, Jack muttered. It's like they're not even trying. Tessa approached one of the terminals cautiously. Their overconfidence works in our favor. Now let's see if I can, yes. The displays began changing rapidly as she manipulated what looked like glowing crystals. You can read alien? No, but I can recognize pattern interfaces when I see them. This is basically a very fancy version of our own computing systems. And oh my. Jack moved to her side, staring at the images and data streams now flooding the displays. What am I looking at? The Vesperian conquest history, Tessa said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and growing excitement. They've conquered 12 other species, but look at how they did it. The displays showed planet after planet surrendering to the Vesperians, often without a single shot fired. They're bluffing, Jack realized. They've been bluffing their way across the galaxy. Their actual military capability is, Tessa pulled up more data, minimal at best. They have impressive transportation and communication technology, but their weapons systems are practically non-existent. So how have they built this so-called confederation? Intimidation. Psychological warfare. They identify species that are either naturally non-confrontational or going through periods of internal conflict, then show up with their fancy ships and bluff them into submission. Jack shook his head in amazement. Space bullies. They're just space bullies. A new display caught Tessa's attention. Look at this. It's some kind of species threat assessment. They've been studying us. The display showed various human activities labeled with alien text and what appeared to be danger ratings. Curiously, ordinary human behaviors seem to have the highest threat levels. They consider our unpredictability to be our most dangerous trait, Tessa translated, frowning. Apparently, the fact that we sometimes act against our own self-interest terrifies them, and they find our willingness to consume untested substances for pleasure to be evidence of, and I quote, disturbing biological recklessness. They're scared of alcohol and spicy food and extreme sports. Basically, anything that doesn't prioritize safety above all else. Jack laughed. So a species that spreads itself across the stars is afraid of humans because we invented bungee jumping and Taco Tuesday. It gets better, Tessa continued, scrolling through more data. They find our entertainment horrifying, especially horror movies. The concept of frightening ourselves for fun is apparently incomprehensible to them. This is gold, Jack said, pulling out a data drive. Can you download this? Before Tessa could answer, a loud alarm began blaring. Jack had accidentally leaned against what turned out to be some kind of sensor panel. Time to go, Tessa said, quickly extracting a crystal from the terminal. I've got enough data. They rushed back toward their entry point, hiding in a recessed alcove as a group of panicked Vesperians ran past, all four arms flailing. Did you hear what they were saying? Jack whispered. Something about a human contamination protocol, Tessa replied. They're more afraid of us touching their stuff than they are of us stealing their data. But once the way was clear, they made a dash for the maintenance hatch. Just as they reached it, they encountered a single Vesperian guard who froze at the sight of them. Jack, acting on instinct, pulled out his phone and took a photo with the flash on. The alien made a sound like a startled cat and collapsed into what appeared to be a defensive curl. Did it just faint? Jack asked incredulously. I think it's playing dead, Tessa said, stepping carefully around the trembling alien. Come on, before more arrive. As they escaped back to Earth, the weight of their discovery began to sink in. They hadn't just found a weakness, they'd uncovered the greatest cosmic con job in history. We need to get this to Director Burke immediately, Tessa said as they hurried back to headquarters. Earth isn't facing an unstoppable alien armada. We're facing interstellar confidence tricksters. Jack grinned. And if there's one thing humans excel at, it's calling a bluff. The emergency war room beneath Geneva was in a state that could generously be called controlled chaos when Jack and Tessa arrived with their intelligence. Military leaders from every major nation were arguing strategy while scientists debated alien physiology and diplomats practiced saying we come in peace in various tones, ranging from pleading to subtly threatening. Director Burke cut through the noise with a sharp whistle. Captain Meyers, Commander Rodriguez report. They quickly shared their findings, with Tessa displaying the stolen data on the central holographic display. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. So these aliens are essentially galactic con artists, asked the Chinese general, looking both relieved and offended. Specialized evolutionary path, commented a British scientist. Their species developed incredible transportation and communication technology, but remained physically vulnerable. So they adapted by becoming bullies rather than fighters. A classic overcompensation, Jack added. All show, no substance. The question remains, Director Burke said, cutting to the heart of the matter. How do we respond? They may be bluffing about their military capabilities, but their technology is still far beyond ours in many respects. We bluff bigger, came a voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see a disheveled woman in a lab coat plastered with cartoon explosion stickers. Her wild grey hair stood out in all directions, and she carried what looked like a modified leaf blower. Dr. Jenkins, Burke acknowledged with a resigned sigh. I was wondering when you'd show up. Call me Boon Boon. Everyone does, the woman insisted, striding into the room and dropping her contraption on the table with a concerning clank. And I've got the solution to our alien problem. Dr. Eleanor Boon Boon Jenkins, Tessa whispered to Jack. Brilliant physicist. Slightly unhinged, has a Nobel Prize and 3 restraining orders from other Nobel Prize winners. Boon Boon pointed at the alien data. These Vesperians think we're unpredictable barbarians. Let's show them just how right they are. We need to put on the greatest show of human insanity ever performed. You want us to? What? Scare them away? A Russian general asked skeptically. Precisely, Boon Boon slapped the table. They've conquered passive species through intimidation, but they've never encountered a species that might out-crazy them. We need to convince them that humans are the real monsters of the galaxy. Jack found himself nodding along. Psychological warfare against a species that's been using psychological warfare against others. Fight fire with fire, Tessa agreed. Or in this case, fight bluff with bluff. I'm calling it Operation Monster Under the Bed, Boom Boom announced proudly. Because that's what we're going to become to them, the terrifying thing they can't stop thinking about. Over the next several hours, the strangest battle plan in human history took shape. Military strategies were tossed aside in favor of elaborate pranks. Weapons engineers were reassigned to create harmless but terrifying effects. Hollywood special effects teams were brought in under top-secret clearance. These light arrays will simulate an atmospheric combustion event, Boom Boom explained, showing schematics. Completely harmless, but from orbit it'll look like we're setting our own atmosphere on fire. And these audio transmitters will broadcast sounds at frequencies their data shows are particularly distressing to them, Tessa added, including human laughter, metal music, and, oddly enough, the the sound of popcorn popping. Jack reviewed the final plan, which read more like a haunted house design than a military operation. So we're going to present our response to their ultimatum, then immediately launch into this carnival of human weirdness? Precisely, Director Burke confirmed. The diplomatic corps will deliver our official rejection of their terms, followed immediately by Operation Monster Under the Bed. A young lieutenant raised his hand. "Ma'an, permission to speak freely?" "Granted." "Granted." "This is the stupidest plan I've ever heard," he said. Then immediately grinned. "I love it." As the final preparations were made, Jack found Tessa on the headquarters roof, looking up at the stars where the Vesperian ship hovered like a silent, judging presence. "Penny for your thoughts, Commander," he said, joining her at the railing. "Just thinking about the absurdity of it all," she replied. "Our first alien contact, and instead of exchanging scientific knowledge or cultural insights, we're planning to convince them we're completely unhinged." "Maybe that is the cultural exchange," Jack suggested. "They show us that appearances can be deceiving, and we show them that humans are really, really good at calling bluffs." Tessa smiled. "You know what the craziest part is? If this works, we might actually be protecting other species from their intimidation tactics. Humanity saving the galaxy by being weird." Jack checked his watch. 6 hours until their deadline. We should get some rest before the show begins. Then, rest? Before we potentially change humanity's place in the cosmos? Tessa laughed. "Not a chance. I'm going to help Boom Boom fine-tune the atmospheric light show." Jack watched her go, feeling strangely optimistic. If Earth was going to face its first extraterrestrial ultimatum, at least they were doing it in the most human way possible, with creativity, audacity, and a healthy dose of collective insanity. The deadline arrived with theatrical precision. At exactly 48 hours after delivering their ultimatum, the Vesperian delegation materialized in Central Park again, this time with an additional entourage of what appeared to be bureaucrats, their multiple arms clutching what Jack assumed were alien clipboards and data tablets. Ambassador Krylox stepped forward, skin rippling with confident purples and blues. "Representatives of Earth, we trust you have made the wise decision to accept our generous offer of protection." The Secretary General stepped forward, flanked by Jack and Tessa in their formal uniforms. World leaders and military commanders stood in neat rows behind them, looking solemn and dignified. Everything about the human response appeared properly submissive and formal. "Ambassador Krylox," the Secretary General began, her voice steady and diplomatic. "On behalf of all nations of Earth, we have carefully considered your proposal." Krylox's upper arms spread in a gesture of benevolent acceptance. "And we have decided," she continued, "to respectfully decline." The rippling colors on Krylox's skin froze in what must have been shock. "Decline? Perhaps you misunderstand the consequences of—" "Oh, we understand perfectly," the Secretary General cut in, her formal tone dropping away as if shedding a disguise. "But before you make any hasty decisions, we thought you should know exactly who you're dealing with." That was the signal. Jack pressed a button on his wrist communicator, and Operation Monster Under the Bed began. The clear blue sky above suddenly appeared to catch fire, great sweeping arcs of flame dancing across the atmosphere. An elaborate light show created by Boom Boom's atmospheric projectors that was completely harmless but looked apocalyptic. "What is happening?" Krylox demanded, all four arms raised defensively as their entourage began backing away. "What are you doing to your own atmosphere?" "Just a little weather modification," Jack said casually. "We do it for fun sometimes." On cue, dozens of civilians in the surrounding areas pulled out specially prepared food items and began eating the spiciest concoctions human cuisine had to offer. The Vesperians watched in horror as humans voluntarily consumed substances that made them sweat, turn red, and in some cases even cry, all while smiling. "There. Poisoning themselves for pleasure," one of the alien bureaucrats whispered in horror. "Taco Tuesday," Tessa explained with a shrug. "It's a tradition." The second phase kicked in as speakers around the park began playing a carefully curated playlist, heavy metal mixed with human laughter, the sounds of popcorn popping. and roller coaster screams of terror delight, all at frequencies the Vesperian data had indicated were particularly distressing to them. The alien delegation began to visibly tremble, their skin cycling through colors so rapidly it was almost seizure-inducing. "But we haven't even shown you our planetary defense system yet," Jack said innocently, gesturing to Tessa. She stepped forward with what looked like an ordinary remote control. "This controls what we call the solar discombobulator. Would you like a small demonstration?" Before Krylox could answer, Tessa pressed a button. Nothing happened. At least nothing real. But synchronized with her action, several pre-positioned satellites in orbit released harmless light bursts that, from the ground, made it appear as if portions of the moon's surface were briefly liquefying. It was all smoke and mirrors, of course, elaborate special effects and perfectly timed theatrics. But to the Vesperians, who had never encountered a species that would go to such lengths to create an elaborate bluff, it was terrifyingly convincing. "That was 0.001% power," Tessa said calmly. "Would you like to see 1%? "Stop!" Krylox's voice had risen several octaves. "This is madness. You would risk planetary damage to reject our protection." The Secretary General stepped forward again. "Ambassador Krylox, perhaps it's time for some honesty between our species. We know the Vesperian Confederation's true nature. We know about your, let's call it diplomatic strategy with other worlds." "You know nothing," Krylox insisted, but their color had drained to a pale, sickly yellow. "We know you're afraid of us," Jack said, taking a deliberate step closer that made the entire alien delegation flinch backward. "You should be." On perfect cue, a group of human children ran through the park, laughing and screaming as they played some incomprehensible game that involved voluntarily falling down and getting back up again. The Vesperian bureaucrats watched in absolute horror, clutching their alien clipboards like shields. "Your young deliberately injure themselves for amusement," one whispered. "Ishi. We call it playing," Tessa said. "They're quite resilient. Humans can sustain incredible damage and still function. Some of us even remove parts of our bodies voluntarily when they malfunction, then continue with our lives." This was, of course, a reference to routine surgery, but the way Tessa described it made several of the aliens' eyes roll back in what might have been the Vesperian equivalent of nausea. Director Burke stepped forward, addressing Krylox directly. "Ambassador, the Confederation has two options. Option 1, you can attempt to make good on your threats, in which case we will be forced to demonstrate the full extent of humanity's uniqueness." "And Option 2? Krylox asked, their voice barely audible. Burke smiled. "You can recognize Earth as a sovereign, independent world that is not to be approached without explicit invitation. You can inform the rest of the galaxy that humans are, how shall I put this, not to be trifled with." As if to punctuate her point, Boom Boom chose that moment to activate her piece de resistance, a harmless but spectacular electromagnetic pulse that caused every electronic device in a half-mile radius to briefly glitch. To the aliens, it appeared as if humans had casually disrupted the fundamental laws of physics as a negotiating tactic. Krylox conferred hurriedly with their entourage, their multiple arms gesticulating wildly. Finally, they turned back to the human delegation. "The Vesperian Confederation recognizes the unique status of Earth and its inhabitants. We will withdraw immediately and recommend that other spacefaring civilizations respect your isolation." "Wonderful," the Secretary General said warmly. "Would you like to stay for lunch? We're having ghost peppers and experimental fusion cuisine." The speed with which the Vesperian delegation dematerialized back to their ship might have set a new galactic record. As the alien ship rapidly ascended and then disappeared from Earth's orbit, cheers erupted across the park, across New York, and across monitors worldwide where the confrontation had been broadcast. Jack turned to Tessa with a grin. "Did we just bluff an entire alien confederation?" And with smoke machines and special effects, she confirmed, looking both stunned and elated. Humanity's first galactic victory, achieved without firing a single shot. "Well," Jack said, watching the sky where the alien ship had vanished, "I think this calls for a celebration. Taco Tuesday, Commander." It's Thursday, Captain. Even better. Taco Thursday sounds much more unpredictable. 3 months after the Vesperian incident, as it came to be known, Earth had undergone subtle but significant changes. Nations that had been on the brink of conflict found common ground in planetary defense initiatives. The United Earth Defense Force had been expanded and reorganized, with a special emphasis on what was now officially called extraterrestrial psychological operations. Jack and Tessa found themselves in a newly constructed underground facility beneath the Gobi Desert, standing before a wall of monitors displaying intercepted alien communications. "It's almost flattering," Tessa said, gesturing to the translations scrolling across the screens. "The Vesperians have been spreading quite the tale about us." According to the intercepted messages, Earth was now known throughout the nearby sectors of the galaxy as the Danger World, home to a species so unpredictable and fearless that they set their own atmosphere on fire as a negotiating tactic. Stories of human biological recklessness had been greatly exaggerated in the telling, with claims that humans could regenerate limbs, survive in vacuum for short periods, and voluntarily ingest substances that would kill any rational species. "My personal favorite," Jack said, pointing to one message, "is that we communicate with our young through rhythmic screaming contests." "They're referring to kindergarten singing time," Director Burke commented, entering the room. Apparently the concept of music is alien to them, so they interpreted it as some kind of dominance ritual. The monitors showed a new star chart, with Earth clearly marked with the alien equivalent of a hazard symbol. "So we've effectively been quarantined by the galactic community," Jack noted. "Not exactly the first contact scenario most people dreamed of." "Actually," Burke said, "it's working entirely in our favor. We've gained time to develop our technology, study the data we gathered from the Vesperians, and prepare for eventual recontact on our terms." Tessa nodded. "And in the meantime, the Confederation's hold over other species is weakening. Our intelligence suggests 3 worlds have already used the Earth strategy to gain their independence." "The Earth strategy?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Apparently, acting unpredictably and embracing what the Vesperians consider biological recklessness is becoming a form of resistance. One species has reportedly started holding regular spicy food competitions just to terrify Vesperian observers." Burke cleared her throat, drawing their attention to a formal document on the central display. "Which brings me to this. The Security Council has approved the formation of a new division within the UEF, a Department of Extraterrestrial Intimidation." Jack snorted. "Catchy name." "It gets better," Burke continued. "Its official mission is to develop and maintain Earth's reputation as, and I quote, the scariest planet in the sector." "And let me guess," Tessa said, "you want us to run it." "Congratulations, Director Meyers, Director Rodriguez." Burke handed them each a badge. "Try not to have too much fun terrifying the galaxy." Later, in their new office, which someone had decorated with movie posters from classic human horror films, presumably to unnerve any future alien visitors, Jack propped his feet on the desk. "So, our job is essentially to ensure that humans maintain our reputation as the monsters under the galactic bed," he mused. "The scary stories alien parents tell their alien children." "There's a certain poetry to it," Tessa agreed. "Throughout human history, we've always feared what might come from the stars. Turns out we're what the stars fear." Jack picked up a report detailing plans for the first human diplomatic mission to a non-Vesperian alien world. It says here we should emphasize human resilience and unpredictability while minimizing overtly aggressive displays. "In other words, be our natural selves but don't actually threaten anyone," Tessa translated. "It's a thin line between being intimidating and being a bully," Jack pointed out. "The Vesperians crossed it. We need to be careful not to do the same." Tessa nodded, then grinned suddenly. "Though I must admit, I'm looking forward to introducing the concept of horror movies to the galaxy. Imagine showing The Exorcist to a species that has no concept of entertaining themselves by being scared." "That's either going to be our greatest diplomatic achievement or the start of an actual interstellar war," Jack laughed. A young lieutenant knocked on their door, looking slightly uncomfortable. "Directors, we've intercepted a new type of signal. It doesn't match any known Vesperian pattern." Jack and Tessa exchanged glances. New aliens? Possibly. And sir, man, they're coming this way. As they hurried to the command center, Jack couldn't help but smile. Ready for round 2 of humanity's grand galactic introduction. Director Rodriguez. Absolutely, Director Meyers, Tessa replied with a gleam in her eye. Let's show them what real monsters look like. Somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, a new alien vessel adjusted its course toward the small blue world that had recently gained such a fearsome reputation. Unlike the ornate Vesperian ships, this craft was sleek, practical, and built for actual warfare rather than mere intimidation. Its commander reviewed the intelligence reports on the species called humans with growing interest. Any civilization that could see through the Vesperian charade and turn it against them was worth investigating. Perhaps humans would make valuable allies or worthy adversaries. Either way, Earth's days of being the scariest thing in the neighborhood were about to be challenged,